Welcome to my talk on living off-grid. I'm going to take you on my journey where I went from living in a normal house with all utilities and services to going to the rainforest for 6 months and then returning to the UK and moving on to a piece of land which had no services, no utilities. I'll explain how I built my own systems up from scratch, exactly what they cost, and some of the lessons that I learnt on the way. At the end of this, you will know exactly how you can build up your own system anywhere in the world. All you need to understand is how much water and sunlight nature is going to give you in your particular location. Let's begin here. If we go back to 2016, I'm living in a small village about 2 hours north of London. Here's a map of the UK. There's a circle around London. The village has about 1,500 people. It's roughly level with Minnesota at the top of the US. Generally, we have grey skies, mild winters and mild summers. We freeze occasionally in the winter, and the summers can get hot on the odd day, but generally it's a fairly mild climate. I would say it's probably similar to Portland, Oregon. This is the map of my street. Up until December, I'm living in the red house and I own all the land in green. I sell that house and I keep most of the land, if you look on the bottom right, and I've obtained permission to build another house in the back garden, which is that long red rectangle. For quite a long time, I tried to find someone to buy the house and rent it back to me. I thought I would live in the house, renting it, and then I would build that house. It didn't quite work out. I worked out that I would spend about, in dollars, around $2,000 a month just to rent and pay utilities. That would be $20,000 to $25,000 a year. And I thought if I could live off grid, I could save that money and put it towards the cost of building the house. As it turned out, that's exactly what happened. And the money I saved entirely paid for the cost of building the house over several years. Having sold the house, I went away to Costa Rica for 6 months. I stayed in this community which is on the Pacific coast. It's a place called Pachamama. I was volunteering, working in the kitchen while I was there. They had hundreds of members. I think they'd been there about 17 years. They owned hundreds of acres with a river running through the centre. They held workshops, yoga, tantra, breathwork. They had detox. So there were people flying in from all over the world. I arrived there in January, which is peak season. I began by camping, which went on for a couple of months. After that, things quieting down a bit. The weather's warming up elsewhere in the world, so there are less visitors, and some of the accommodation became available. I moved into the place here on the bottom right, which they called a casita. This is an open cabin in the rainforest. It has just a bed with a mosquito net and a cold shower. There's no toilet. The forest is your toilet. Whatever you leave in there is gone in the morning, eaten by the insects. Having moved there from camping, I felt like I'd died and gone to heaven. It was amazing just to realise that I needed so little to be so comfortable and content. And I think it was good for me to have that experience before I moved back to England and went off-grid. I was there until about end of May. The weekend I left, I bought a caravan off eBay and I had the guy deliver it to the site. In England, you need to live in a registered home. You can't just buy a piece of land and go and live on it. You can only stay there for 28 days in the whole year. And there's a few exceptions to that, and one of them is if you are building a house. This meant that I had 28 days in which to start building the house. I hired a digger, I dug a trench, I paid my fee to the building inspector. He came out and inspected the trench and approved it. And that meant that I was legally living there and building a house. Let's move on to part 2, which is the day 1 needs. Even though I'd sorted out my sleeping arrangements, I hadn't really thought about the other things that I would need. and I very quickly realized that there were four things. These are Wi-Fi, electricity, water, and sanitation. And I also realized that I needed them urgently. Next, I'll talk about how I dealt with each of these day one needs. First, I'll talk about Wi-Fi. If you look on the bottom right, you'll see a satellite photo of the village. On the left side of the village is the cell tower, and the right side of the village at the far end is my house. I found that signal was just about usable at my house. Often it was quite poor. I found that I would have to drive to the centre of the village if I had to make maybe a video call or send a large file. I did survive though for many years, just using my phone as my modem. Next, I'll talk about electricity. When I first arrived back, fortunately, one of my neighbours said to me that I could plug into his electricity supply, which was quite a relief. I did this for a month or two, and then one day he made a joke about the electricity thief. So I thought it was time that I did something about it. So I went on to YouTube and I watched many videos on how to set up a solar system, and I worked out that I needed four things. And here they are. Number one is the solar panels. Number two is a charge controller. The charge controller regulates the flow of electricity as the sun goes behind the clouds or it goes behind trees. It sends a nice clean flow of electricity down to the battery. From the battery, number three, we go to number four. Number four is called an inverter. Solar systems are generally 12 volts and household appliances are 240 volts. So the system has to be stepped up from 12 to 240, and the inverter deals with this. If you look on the bottom right, you'll see a graph of the amount of power available throughout the year. So on the left is the winter, then the graph rises to the summer, and then drops down again to the winter. I had no idea really how much power I was going to get throughout the year until I began to put my own system together and find out. And generally there's about 20 times more power in the summer than in the winter in my location, but that will vary elsewhere. I've drawn a second line on the graph, which is for Spain. I would guess that Spain or maybe Texas and below that has a lot more sunshine, so there'll be a lot more power available and it will be much easier to survive. But generally, December and January were a big struggle for me each year. Let's talk a bit about cost. If you look at the top left photograph, you'll see my first system. This was two solar panels. I began with two, and then I had an intermediate system which had 10 solar panels, and then I went to 20 solar panels. On the right, you'll see the cost of the solar panels. For some reason, the used panels, there's a lot of them around on eBay, which are about 200 watts, and they very roughly cost about upwards of $30. But now you can buy a brand new panel, which is 450 watt, which is just double the price of the used panels. So you may as well just buy a brand new panel, which takes up half the space. For charge controllers, I began with very simple controllers which were low cost, maybe $15 to $30. And then later on I began to buy charge controllers which were about $150. As the system expanded, I would just buy multiples of these systems. Batteries are something that I got wrong. I made many mistakes and wasted a lot of money. I started off with using car batteries, which wrecked all my electronics. From there, I bought forklift batteries. A lot of people on YouTube recommended using these. So I had them for a while. And then after that, I bought what are called Trojan batteries, which are expensive lead acid batteries. So these are the same as the forklift and the car batteries. For some reason, I avoided buying lithium, but eventually I bought lithium, and I really wished I'd bought that at the start. If you look on that black image, which is a screenshot from my phone, this is the readout from the lithium battery. So with the lithium battery, you can see exactly what's going on inside the battery, which you can't with the lead acid. It tells you exactly the percentage of power in the battery. It tells you what you're using. You can watch and monitor your appliances as soon as you switch something on. So it just made things so much easier. And then lastly, the inverter. I had quite a few used inverters. I think I would pay maybe $50, $60, $70. And then after a while, I began buying new Chinese inverters where I'd pay about maybe $200. I found that these died after a year or two. They didn't just suddenly stop working. That what would happen is things would start tripping whenever I used them. Eventually, I found this brand of inverter called Victron. Victron are the Rolls-Royce of solar equipment. They're expensive, but I really wished I'd bought these from the start. Now I have a advanced system where I have a £1,500 Victron inverter. If you look on the bottom right, below number 4, the inverter, you'll see a wavy line, and below that, what's called a square wave. There's something called a pure sine wave inverter, which is the one you must buy if you're using it for electronics. The square wave is the cheaper version. I wouldn't use that at all. One small thing to add, on the bottom left, I've got one of my power tools. I have lots of power tools with batteries, and I found this piece of kit you can clip onto the battery, which is a USB connector and a torch. And I've used that many times, that if I overused the batteries and emptied them and I had no power, at least I could plug in and have a light and charge things up using this adapter until the next day when the panels would put some electricity back in the system again. Let's have a look at the 3 different systems I had. So over time I went from basic to intermediate to advanced. In principle, this was 2 panels, 10 panels, and then 20 panels. I put a price with each system in the black on the right, and that's roughly what I could buy each of those systems for now. So let's start with the basic. Generally, I had lights and I could run my electronics. I also found other things I could run. I could run an electric blanket, a fan in the summer, which is quite helpful. I had various water pumps. I might collect water in one place and then pump it around somewhere else. They're quite low powered. If you're living next to a river, then you could pump water up from the river with basic system. I moved on to intermediate. Generally, what intermediate did is that it allowed me to start to let go of needing gas during the summer. I was able to I put a twin tub washing machine, which is a camping washing machine. It's low voltage. Worked okay, I just found it a bit backbreaking. I could also power an electric kettle, this is a low voltage kettle. It would make enough for 2 drinks and it would take 5 minutes to boil. In the summer, when there was a lot more sun, I could distill water using a dentist still, which I'll talk about in the water section. And also, surprisingly, I could run a radiator. April or even May, there's the odd evening where it gets quite cold. So there might be heat needed for a few hours. The electric radiator will come on for a while, then they go off, and then they switch back on when the thermostat drops down. So surprisingly, I could run that if there was enough power on the battery. Maybe it had been a sunny day, so the batteries were full. I also started to use a single induction hob, and I used that for quite a long time. Just 1 ring, but again, it meant I didn't need to buy gas. The advanced system has been enough to connect into the house and run everything, not always all at once. The primary thing it does run is the washing machine, which is something I struggled with. It took me ages to work this out, but a washing machine needs well over 4 kilowatts. When it first starts, the drum is turning, the pumps are running, and the water is being heated. So it has this spike in power requirement. A lot of inverters will go up to maybe 2,000 watts, or even generators, they often stop around that 3,500. So it wasn't until I got a 5,000 watt inverter that I could run the washing machine. I bought a hybrid car, so 6 months of the year I can charge that up off the solar power. I've also got the hot water cylinder in the house connected up, and that uses 3 to 4 kilowatts of power at one time. I can power an electric kettle. So it does make all the difference. One thing I should add is that as the systems get bigger and bigger, just to switch them on uses a reasonable amount of power. That would mean that if you've only got 2 panels, you can't just fit a 5,000 kilowatt system. It will drain the batteries very quickly. Moving on here, March is quite an interesting month. For where I am in the UK, mostly it's grey skies, but we do have some sunny days as spring is beginning. On a cloudy day, the batteries might charge up 20 to 30%, and on a sunny day, they can charge up 100%. So I think of it as having a certain amount of electricity to spend during the day. A simple meal, such as cooking soup, might be 5%. Something more complex could be 30%, and that could be twice in one day. A simple washing machine cycle, which is, say, a 15-minute wash, is 5%, but other washes are 30% and upwards. The radiator will put about 5% on an hour. Hot water for the house, I can switch it on, let it heat the water up, which ends up being the water at the top of the tank because heat rises, and that's enough just for a shower and washing the dishes. And I can charge the car as well. But I have to be careful that I don't overuse it, and I also have to monitor the weather and make sure that I can see what's going to happen over the next few days. On the right there, I've shown that chart again with England as the red in the winter and then rising to peak in the summer and then winter again. So it's that area where the graph is starting to rise. It fluctuates during March and April. But I would imagine if you're in Spain or Texas, then you have a lot more power. So you might be charging up nearly every day up to 100%. And finally, here's the generator that I bought after about a couple of years. So I was relying on the neighbours to help me out if I needed power tools. I did buy the generator thinking that this would solve the washing machine problem. I found that a lot of generators will go up to this 3 to 3.5 kilowatt output. And the reason for that is that most appliances run on that amount of power. If you start to go up to 5 kilowatt, you end up with a much bigger machine, and then you're pumping out 5 kilowatts of power, whether you need it or not. So it becomes a very inefficient machine. Unfortunately, the generators just didn't work with the washing machine because it couldn't handle the power spike at the beginning of the cycle, where over 4 kilowatts is required. Generally, I just use the generator in an emergency and also to help me through those winter months, December and January, where I might use it 2 or 3 times a week. But because of where I live, I'm in this residential area with the houses all around, so I'm really quite reluctant to use it, so I don't cause any problems with the neighbours. Let's talk about sanitation now. I had the caravan, which has this chemical toilet, number 1, or a cassette toilet. I couldn't empty that anywhere, really, without inconveniencing neighbours or anyone else I knew. So I had to find another way around the problem. Initially, I went to the forest every day, and then I went to the supermarket. I think that went on for a couple of weeks, and I got bored of that. And then I decided I would work out compost toilet. I'd always thought I'd have a compost toilet, but I'd never really worked out how I was going to deal with it. I was a bit apprehensive about having this increasing, maybe smelly pile to deal with. So I came up with this idea for a mobile compost toilet. If you look to number 2, I bought a kitchen bin, which is about 2 feet tall, 60 centimetres tall, and made a wooden seat, and also a separate wooden cover, which is just a very flat piece of wood. If you look to number 3, this is garden compost. I would spread this out on a board and let the sun dry it out till it was completely dry and crispy. So you put that in the bottom of the white bin, and then you go on top of it. You only do your number 2s in here, you do your number 1s elsewhere, and then you put a bit of the compost on top. Because the compost is so dry, that absorbs all the moisture, so there's absolutely no smell. Because it's so easy to handle, you can use it for a few days, empty it and clean it. I had to deal with the waste, so I came up with this idea, which is number 4. This is called a hot bin. It's a compost bin. You pour the compost in there and you put worms in, and there's a little tap at the bottom, and the worms eat everything you put in there, and they give a cup of worm juice every day. Yeah, I'd empty my compost toilet in there, plus all my vegetable waste from the house. And because I'm using compost, the worms can eat it. A lot of people use sawdust for their compost toilets, but I would assume that the worms don't eat that. Initially, I bought some Super Dragon worms off the internet, and I think they died quickly, so I just chucked a handful of garden worms in, and they multiplied to where there was this ball of worms in there about the size of a grapefruit, just wandering around, eating everything. And I never had to empty it. It really worked extremely well. Eventually, then, as I was building the house, I got connected into the drainage and then started to use a standard toilet. Let's talk now about water. Looking at number 1, here's a weather map. When I lived in the house, I hadn't really taken any interest in the weather. Maybe in the winter it got a bit colder. But when I began to live this off-grid life, I became very interested in what was happening. I began to read weather maps, and even now I study the weather. I'm well aware of what's going to be happening in the next couple of weeks, both regarding the amount of available sunshine and also water for rainwater harvesting. If you look at photograph number 2, you'll see the 200-litre water butt. This is my first means of collecting rainwater. Just to the right, you can see my shed. It was quite a small shed, maybe 6 square metres. I would collect the rainwater into that 200-litre tank, and then I would filter it, which I'll talk about in a minute. As far as my day 1 needs go, another one of my neighbours said that I could fill up from a tap in his garden. So I did that for a while, but I found that a bit intrusive and just began to find my own way to collect water. Sometimes I drive to my children and fill up. I had 4 25-litre cans. I'd fill them up. I also found a spring which was about maybe 10 miles away. It's a very famous spring. In olden times, people would travel hundreds of miles to drink the water. So I would use that water, but I found it difficult not to collect a bit of mud or debris from the stream where I was collecting it. After a while, I bought the item number 3, which is a 1,000-litre tank. I bought the white version, which was the wrong one. I found after a while the algae would start to grow in the tank, so always buy the black version. If you look at the size of that tank, it's 1,000 litres. I guess that's 250 gallons. Where I lived in England, the roof of my house would collect about 50 or 60 of these over the course of the year. That would be enough, which is roughly the standard usage for 2 people. It's around about 100 litres a day, but that could be reduced right down to 10 or 20% of that, just providing drinking water and water for cooking if there's a drought. Looking at number 4, I'd be collecting water off the roof and moving it around the site, storing it. The caravan came with the 2 white-coloured cans, which I found very difficult to manage. It was okay for a day or 2, but after that they became very cumbersome. And in the middle you'll see a garden watering can, a green watering can. That became one of my favourite pieces of kit, and I'll explain why. They're excellent solar collectors. They're a nice thick plastic. If I covered the hole in the top using a sponge which was slightly wet, it would heat up surprisingly quickly if the sun was shining. And then having come back from the rainforest with the cold shower, I didn't mind just pouring this over my head. For a while I also joined the gym locally. In the shed, I built a bathroom with a hot water cylinder, hoping that would give me a decent shower, but I couldn't get the pressures to work properly. Eventually, I found a really simple solution, which I wished I'd worked out early on. There are USB-powered showers. These are battery showers, and all I had to do was heat up the water in the can and then drop that green thing into the can, and then I had really quite a good shower, probably even better than I would get at the gym. Looking at number 3, this is a low-powered electric kettle, which I bought once I got up to the intermediate system. This would heat up enough for a couple of hot drinks. It's a lot smaller than the photograph gives the impression, and it would take about 5 minutes to boil. But it meant that I didn't need to use any gas. There was one year I got to the spring, and I think the gas had run out, but I'd moved up to the intermediate system, and I managed to last that summer without buying any more gas. In that same year, I built this rocket stove, which is basically a pile of bricks with a hole up the centre and a hole in the bottom. And I would use this for cooking, so I didn't need to use gas anymore until the winter came back. I needed gas for heating. On this page, at the top left, are biodegradable soap that I use, so it meant I could have a shower out on the grass and not feel that I was poisoning the ground. I also one time made a cleaning agent using apple cider vinegar and lemons, which worked extremely well. At the top right, I've written 100 to 120 litres. This is the standard design quantity for a person living in a house. And then down below that, I've looked at what I really needed it for. That when I live in the house, all the water came out of the tap and it was all the same water. But when I began to live off-grid, I began to see the water as different kinds of water. So I need a very small amount of water, 3 to 5 litres a day for drinking and cooking. The shower is 10 litres, that garden watering can is 10 litres. I found I needed 2 of them to have a decent shower. To wash the dishes for 5 or 10 litres, and then the washing machine can be quite a bit more water. And often I would use rainwater to wash the washing machine. I should add that I'd watch the rain coming in, and I would let the rain wash the roof down. I would disconnect the guttering, let the rain wash the roof down, and then connect it back up, and then I'd have much cleaner water. If it was a very heavy storm, I would let it wash the sky as well and get rid of all the dust and pollutants in the air. And just finally, filtration. I began with number 1, which is a jug water filter. I would use that, and I would also boil all the water that I collected. I added to this item number 3, which is a Dentist Distill. I used that when I had the intermediate system. That would make a jug full of water, which I would use for drinking and cooking. It would last, I think, a few days. Later on, I bought item number 2, which is a gravity water filter, and I wished I'd bought that much earlier. It's so much easier to use and gives a much bigger quantity of water. And finally, number 4 is where I'm heading next. This is a professional filter system. In the UK, all of these seem to have plastic filters, whereas I have found items in the US which are stainless steel, so they can be reused and washed out without having to keep going back and buying more filters. I've talked about water that I needed for personal use, but I also do a lot of gardening now, and I need water for that. So I've dug a pond which is about 12 feet diameter, a circular pond, and I use that most days for watering the plants. And again, that's something I would do very early on if I was starting a new project. This next page is a list of links to everything I've talked about on here. You can look up exactly what I paid for things and work out the cost of moving off grid. There's no affiliate links, it's all just information for you to access in one place. Finally, I'll talk about my food forest. When I lived in the house, I think I planted a grapevine and an apple tree which my son kicked over, but pretty much nothing. And then since I've begun the off-grid life, I've gradually been developing my own food forest. I have about 12 different items of fruit, and I would say from May right through to September, there's some fruit in the garden, and that's my breakfast every day. I like to plant things which I put in the ground and I don't have to do anything with them again. The middle list is some of these items. I've got a rosemary bush, bay leaf. I leave quite a bit of the garden wild, so there's lots of nettles which I put in the cooking. I found wild spinach and I've spread the seeds everywhere. I use that quite a lot in the summer. And also late in the year I found wild lettuce. And then each year I have a few vegetables which vary in success. The whole idea here is not just about saving money and having no bills. It's about moving to a place where I can be completely independent of the system. It's quite common for the village to be cutting off water or electricity while they're digging the road up for some reason. I never notice it. I am completely independent of the system. I have to connect the house up to all the utilities to make it legal and then have it signed off. But as soon as I've done that, then I have the option just to disconnect everything and set up my own off-grid system again. I have all the panels in place, I have my water storage, so I don't really need the government anymore. I've come to the end now, and I hope you feel inspired enough to go and find your own piece of land and begin your own off-grid adventure. And I wish you the very best of luck with that.